NetZero through Geospatial Innovation, hosted by Geovation in partnership with the Knowledge Transfer Network at the Space and Geospatial 11-day virtual pavilion for COP26, meeting net zero with the power of place. I'm Chris Parker, and I'd like to see the next slide, and thanks very much for that. I'm Chris Parker. I'm co-host, co-founder of Geovation, along with a number of other people. We're talking about meeting net zero through geospatial innovation. What is Geovation? So Geovation is the home of the geospatial startup ecosystem. We're an Ordnance survey initiative, and we consist of a community, 3 accelerators, a hub, and a set of partner hubs as well around UK. And our role is to help launch, grow, and support startups in the geospatial and property sectors. And I'd like the next slide, please. Thank you. And we're splitting the session up into 2 halves, like a good football match. So the first session is a panel session towards net zero buildings. And that's going to be introduced and chaired by my colleague, Donna Lindsay, who's the innovation lead at Ordnance Survey. Donna's also vice chair of the Space for Climate group as well. She supports Ordnance Survey's mission to be a world leader in geospatial services, delivering location insight for positive impacts with the creation of innovative products, services with colleagues, partners, and customers. Donna has over 30 years experience in Earth observation as a founding director in startups and corporate directorships as well. And she was a finalist in Innovate UK's Women in Innovation Awards as well, as being a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. So I'd like to hand over to Donna now to introduce our panel for the first half of this session. Thanks very much, Donna.
Thank you, Chris. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here today and talking about towards net zero for buildings. This is a really important topic. As we all know, the built environment is responsible for a significant proportion of global emissions. It's 40% roughly. And of this, 28% is attributed to the operational emissions from energy to use to heat our homes, to cool our homes, and to light the buildings. But also there's 11% from embodied carbon emissions as well, found in materials and the construction processes across the whole building life cycle. And in the UK, obviously, we've got net zero targets to hit. So that built environment sector is going to need to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030 in order to meet those targets. So this is a massive challenge. We have 26 million buildings in the UK, all need to be retrofit, and about 2/3 of those are actually under EPC level D, which is poor insulation. So with that enormous challenges, I think there's also real opportunity, and there's a real opportunity for innovative solutions and ventures, and whether that's retrofitting the existing building stock, minimizing the building life cycle, and that creating that circular economy piece. And also whether or not we need to create new methodologies and processes, reuse of material, and addressing those standards. So this session is really all about trying to understand how we can really sort of drill into those barriers to achieving those targets. How can they be overcome? How can retrofitting really be pragmatically achieved? And what can be achieved in new builds, and how, and all these really exciting questions. And critically, we are Ordnance Survey after all, and Geovation. How can space and geospatial and prop tech data and our expertise can be applied to literally building back better? Okay, so I'm really pleased to be introducing our panel, who is going to be trying to provide answers to all these questions. I'll start with introducing Marion Bailey, she is an architect and associate at Paul Davis and Partners, a London-based international practice known for their skillful integration of contemporary architecture within historic environments and expertise in high-end residential, commercial, civic, and mixed-use projects. The second panelist is Lewis Sharman from the Carbon Co-op. Lewis is a customer experience manager at Carbon Co-op with a degree in product design. He has worked across a range of public services, including the Northwest Construction Hub, and is experienced in construction procurement and framework management. And then our third panelist is Audley English. Audley is a multi-award-winning architect and founder and managing director of Buildeco.com. They are delivering the future via an innovative form of modular flat-pack offsite intelligent construction for the built environment. Can't wait to hear about that one. His commitment within the built environment spans over decades of designs and projects that build back greener. And our fourth panelist, last but not least, is Clara Bagnell George from Elementa Consulting, and she is an associate in environmental design and engineer at Elementa. A deep green engineering consultancy, and in 2017 she initiated LETI, which is a voluntary group of built environment professionals to support the transition of the UK's built environment to net zero carbon. She's also the lead editor for the recent LETI Climate Emergency Design Guide and the LETI Embodied Carbon Primer. So it's a really exciting panel, and without further ado, I'd like to hand over to each of the panelists to really give us that 5 minutes presentation to talk about what they're doing now to try and address these core challenges. So I'd like to hand over to Marion, please, for your first session.
Hi, I'm here. I don't know if you can see me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So if I could have the slides, please. Thank you. So today I'm going to talk to you about the challenge of retrofitting the nation, really. And as an introduction graph, if you haven't really grasped the size of the challenge, I hope that this very, very simplistic graph illustrating the worldwide CO2 emission will show you this descent that we need to embark on. And as all descent, they are sometimes more difficult actually than the ascent. So we need to be prepared, well equipped, and this is what I'm going to go through in this short 5-minute presentation. So we need to absolutely change our habits. Living comfortably in a building has not been always the same. And in the 19th century, obviously, we were burning perhaps wood in our houses that were not insulated, but we coped with lower temperature by wearing perhaps more clothing indoors. In the 20th century, we started to equip our houses to feel more comfortable and get rid of the jumper and the woolly hat indoors. However, that came with obviously the introduction of fossil fuel into the engineering of our properties. So the move that we need to make is really address the whole fabric of the building to make sure that the demand is absolutely minimal. And from that point, we can bring energies that are sustainable and renewable. So just to illustrate also the size of, or the main step that we need to start on is really about addressing the heating demand in our homes. And you can see that the key target really is to slash down, right down the heating demand. And this has to come with addressing the fabric of the building, of all our buildings first. So we need to make sure that we know how to do this. The main and principal trusted and tested approach is to follow the key principles of passive house, which is good level of insulation, very good triple glazing or very efficient glazing, a good ventilation system, air tightness, and also addressing court bridges to avoid condensation. So these are really the 5 key principles to follow when you are addressing the fabric of your building. Now, in a retrofit context, it's much more difficult than a new build because you have a context to work from, and that presents a lot of challenges. And every single project will, to some extent, be a prototype, as people have perhaps amended some of their homes since they have been built. So the knowledge required to, for example, carry out or design a detail like this, albeit this is a listed building. So this is probably the most complicated set of detail that you would ever come across. Nevertheless, you need to really learn and understand your building fabric. In particular, moisture movement in a retrofit, this is the most important, is to make sure that the level of intervention that you apply to your building will not have an adverse effect on the building fabric. So your building won't be worse off for the retrofit. So this is probably, as I say, one of the most advanced sets of details for an internal wall insulation. External wall insulation is, of course, a lot easier to implement. So I would like to encourage everybody to really go back to their desks and learn again how to build these retrofits. This is a building physics focused activity. This is not something that is commonly taught, although it's increasing at university, but definitely not in my generation. So I had to go back to university and do a master's degree to understand what that would entail. And these are some of the organizations that can provide you with really, really key knowledge into how to deliver these retrofits. There was a really big missing piece in the puzzle of retrofit up to last week, in fact, which was a guidance, a kind of step-by-step approach about how far should we go on retrofitting our buildings, depending on the typology of the buildings, and how do we actually do it, and what are the key case studies that can show us how it's been done before. So Clara will talk to you about the LETI guide in a minute, but I just thought it's really a key document of reference that I would like everybody to go and read if they are interested in that topic. I have also published a few years back a case study book, which goes into a lot more depth about performance of 20 retrofits with all sorts of varied ways of building a retrofit, which I hope will give you some key intelligence, I suppose, in how this can be achieved. And that is it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion, and having family with great listed buildings, I can really appreciate that. So now we're going to hand over to Lewis from the Carbon Co-op, who's going to be talking to us about people-powered retrofit.
Hi everyone. Oh, we've gone forward there. Right. Okay. Right. Hi, I'm Lewis. I work on the People Power Retrofit service up in Manchester, and we're helping householders to retrofit their homes. So we started with a problem, which was that people couldn't find technical expertise. They couldn't find contractors they wanted to, that they trusted to do the work really. And they just didn't really know what the process was and where to get started. So this is our service. There's various stages that can help householders from start to finish. What I really want to talk to you about today is our home retrofit planner assessment and how we use that to collect building information and the opportunity that that represents to drive down carbon emissions further. So say you're having a home retrofit planner assessment at your house. A retrofit surveyor will come over and look at your ceilings and other parts of your house and take down a load of information about how the house is constructed, the way that you live, what sort of heating system you've got, that sort of thing. We have some software home retrofit planner tool. That information is fed into that, and the surveyor will create scenarios, and it will calculate, it will basically show what the interventions, when you do energy efficiency measures, what the effect will be. That helps householders to make a decision. The work is done, and then what was done is fed back into the model. So you've got a basis of a building information model there. And that ties into this sort of stuff. So building information modeling, so typically done on quite large projects. It's about building a digital twin, so a digital version alongside the built version. And by creating better information, you have the advantage of being able to coordinate things on site better and basically control the whole process a lot more easily. There's standard construction industry process and framework, and it was designed to drive value in the industry. In retrofit, specifically, we're interested in the building information part. So that's all of that line by line information that you would get through that process. That tells you what's in the house, what is it made out of, what was the manufacturer of that product, when was it installed, all of that sort of stuff. And we're interested in that because if it's in a standard format, it can be fed into systems to optimize performance later in operation, and it's a record that you've got for future work if you're doing some extra stuff after the project. There is a good case study for this, which is the UK Bim Mandate. So the government have intervened on this stuff before and basically told the construction industry, we're not getting as much value out of our buildings as what we need, so you need to create better information, and that's going to get us better value. And people are thinking about this stuff right now. The Green Finance Institute are thinking of building renovation passports, that digital logbook idea, and the Trustmark data warehouse as well. There's not a data standard kind of attached to that stuff at the moment, but their longer term aim is to create that logbook again. So yeah, lots of good thinking about this stuff going on. Open Data Institute had a report out yesterday as well, looking at how we can bring it all together. And just to close, I just wanted to say the energy industry are really, really good at using data. They've done it for a long time. Construction are kind of new to it, but there's a good framework in place for creating and managing data. So let's kind of bring it all together and then, you know, really exploit the information that we're getting out of doing these retrofits. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Lewis. And I find that really exciting, actually. After spending a decade in providing data products to the conveyancing sector, I can see real value in blending this across that piece. So that's really, really interesting. So thank you very much for that. So now I'm going to hand over to Orderly English from Buildeco, which is a talk around the low cost, affordable, low carbon and new builds.
Thank you for having me. And I'm consolidating 3 decades of work into this 5 minutes talk about sustainability. I've always been the lone voice in the early days about sustainability, and with the climate change and COP26 taking place, let's hope it's positive going forward. Slide. What is net zero? Balancing the elements of human needs. I've given this thought for many years, and I've come up with the phrase, humans must reduce carbon, or carbon will reduce humans. Reference to integrated approach. Designed the first BREEAM housing scheme in the 90s with running costs of £200 and the first social green roof scheme, we've integrated landscape and into design, and we've addressed the 7 sustainable goals out of the 17. to achieve net zero. Sorry, this is clicking one. This is an example of our fabric first solution, as was mentioned before. This is our standard house type that can be developed and create all different forms of houses. We start off with a minimum of EPCB and passive house and net zero with battery technology. We recently completed the net zero house for Ealing Council, and the running costs for that in the coldest month was £23. It's been handed over a year now, and to date, we have had no reported defects. So we feel that MMC is a way forward. We're using pile foundation to not disturb the biodiversity, and using a flat panel solution we can build in the most difficult locations. Going forward, our panelized system is made from a kit of parts. So we believe that we can deliver 1 million houses, as an example, within the Oxford and Cambridge corridor area. None of the houses has to be the same. They're all different. So you get away from this identikit housing that mass volume house builders are building. So just houses and flats, any style, any size is achievable. Going forward, we see there's a massive opportunities in the overseas market, Caribbean, Africa, and the Asian market. On the left-hand side, this is housing in the African continent, where they are growing their own vegetables on their roof and their solar panels as well. On the sloping sites, also using cross air ventilation to cool the buildings. So there's massive opportunities overseas, we feel as well, using net zero construction. Thank you.
Thanks, Audley, and I think that's again really fascinating. If we can build 1 million houses with EPCB and above, that's quite a game changer. So now over to our final panelist. So we're moving over now to Clara Bagnell-George from Elementa Consulting and LETI on standards and guides for net zero buildings.
Thank you. I don't know, someone stopped the screen.
Yeah, we seem to have lost the slides.
I'm not quite sure what's happened there, but hopefully someone will get those slides back. But thanks for the introduction, Donna. Yeah, my name's Clara Bagnell-George. I'm an associate at Elementa Consulting in my day job, and I'm also very heavily involved in LETI, the London Energy Transformation Initiative, along with Marion, who just spoke earlier. So we're a voluntary group of built environment professionals that work together to try and move the UK's buildings towards net zero carbon. And today I'm going to talk to you about the kind of work and the kind of targets we've been setting. So LETI's been producing some really useful guidance shown here on the screen, looking at new buildings, looking at embodied carbon, looking at retrofit. We've got a client guide for net zero and some useful one-pagers explaining embodied carbon and whole life carbon. We've set a clear set of guidance on targets for meeting net zero, and I'll talk them through today. And we've also got some clear guidance on definitions to make sure everybody is speaking the same language. They're all available for free to download at www.leti.london. So I would really encourage you to to do that. So first, I'm going to talk about new buildings. Our Climate Emergency Design Guide focuses on new buildings, and we published this in January 2020. And we're really excited. It's been downloaded over 60,000 times in over 100 countries. So it's had much more of an impact than we'd hoped. It sets out targets for 2 different housing typologies and schools and offices. So we have operational energy targets, embodied carbon targets, a hierarchy for heating and hot water, making sure that your heat and hot water systems are not do not rely on fossil fuels. We've got a demand response indicators and recommendations for data disclosure. So in terms of operational energy, let's take that first, and let's quickly briefly talk about what does good look like. So specifically in the UK, our regulation and policy is based on a percentage better than like a carbon emission metric that's based on a percentage better than your building regulations notional building. This is a really confusing metric because you can't really understand, you can't measure it in use. And when you have those really big reductions that we need to, the difference between percentage buildings that achieve 80% reduction, 85% reduction, it might not look very big on the scale of percentage reductions, but it actually has a bigger impact. So it's just quite a confusing metric. We're really trying to switch the industry towards this absolute kilowatt hour and meter squared per year metric that varies per building typology, because you can design to it, you can track it in the design stages, and you can measure it in use, which is really important because we need to really be refocusing our definition of good on actually how buildings are performing, because currently at the moment, especially with EPC ratings, it's a bit like having a cooking competition based on photos of the food rather than tasting it, and we really need to switch to that operational energy in use focus when we're defining good. So in order to meet our climate change targets, we need to make sure that, first of all, buildings do not use fossil fuels, so no gas burnt on site, and then we need to make sure that we only use electricity that's within our what we call our energy budget, which informs our energy use intensity target. So we have a finite amount of renewables in the UK that we're going to have, that we have now, that we're going to have in 2030, 2050, and we want to make sure that if you say take the renewables that are appropriate for buildings, and then you work out how many buildings you're going to have, how many square meters of buildings, you can divide that by a floor area so you can understand your energy budget. That means that if all buildings only use that amount of electricity, then we're within our renewables energy budget, which aligns us with zero carbon. So that's the operational energy piece. Now looking at our embodied carbon piece. So we've published an embodied carbon primer in 2020, and more recently earlier this year in May, we've updated that and done what we're calling our carbon alignment documents, which I'll talk to you about in a second. But I suppose I wanted to share with you here that our, as we're really reducing our operational energy consumption and our operational carbon emissions, this means that the embodied carbon becomes more and more significant. So that's why we need to also focus on having embodied carbon targets as well as operational energy targets. So we have kind of joined forces with others in the industry to publish a set of clear targets. They have a kind of G to A++ rating on embodied carbon, and this is the upfront embodied carbon, stage A1 to A5. So that's from digging up raw materials on site to practical completion of the building before anyone moves in. And our total embodied carbon targets, which include all your replacement and repair and maintenance, in use, and end of life embodied carbon. And what we're saying right now at the design stage is we're saying now, buildings that are achieving a C rating in design stage now are doing pretty well, but a B rating is even better. And by 2030, we want everyone that are to be designing to an A target. So that's how we're shifting the definition of good, depending on how we move forward, because the industry has been grappling really well with operational energy over the last 10 years. So we've got kind of clear targets on that we can set, whereas embodied carbon, we acknowledge we're on a journey, so we're going to be needing to really reduce that embodied carbon year on year. So how does this relate to net zero? So this is a little bit of a summary here. on our what we need to do in terms of our operational energy to meet net zero. So we need to be fossil fuel free, we need to meet our space heating demand and our operational energy targets. Then we need to have our on-site and our off-site renewables. And with embodied carbon, you need to meet those upfront and total embodied carbon targets. And then you can offset at practical completion your upfront carbon, and annually you would offset your embodied carbon in use and at the end of life. So I've spoken about new buildings. Now moving on to existing homes. As Marion mentioned, LETI published 2 weeks ago our Climate Emergency Retrofit Guide, which gives you really clear guidance on how existing buildings can be adapted to meet UK climate change targets. And this, it was authored by over 100 volunteers, like all of our LETI guidance. It's quite a hefty document. It's 200 pages. I mean, it's incredibly useful, but we have provided a quick start guide, which is 2 pages, which really summarizes the approach we're taking to retrofit. So it gives the key principles, it explains how retrofit can be tailored to a property type. It shows the importance of a whole house retrofit plan. It gives a flow chart on deciding what the target should be. And it gives you the energy targets and the fabric and system targets. We've also produced this summary for policymakers, so a 2-pager. So for people who have less time, can be really clear at what LETI's saying we should be, how we're defining good in terms of retrofit and what the Climate Emergency Retrofit Guide says. So, and we've also provided examples of typologies of how you can meet the targets. But just with 1 minute talking through how we're defining good, we have 2 depths of retrofit. One of them we're calling LETI best practice, and then the deeper retrofit is LETI exemplar. And within the LETI best practice, there is targets which are for unconstrained retrofits, and then constrained retrofits where you've got space constraints or heritage constraints. There are 2 approaches to meeting those targets. One of them is an energy targets approach, which means that you do some energy modelling with a predictive modelling software such as PHPP. But if you're not doing that on your project, then there is a fabric and systems kind of constituent element method approach. And then there's also, as I mentioned, this kind of flow chart, which means that you have you can go through, you can work out what is the right best approach for you. Anyway, I've been told that I've been talking for too long, so I am going to say thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Clara. Well, I was enjoying that. so thanks for that, and thanks for all our panelists for their 5 minutes exposés of everything that's going on. So one of the questions that has come up is that with all the challenges that we're facing, what are the challenges that you think we need to overcome in order for your respective initiatives to succeed in achieving the net zero buildings? So I'm going to ask that question to each of you in turn. So I'm going to start off with you, Lewis, if that's okay.
I suppose a big thing that we find is that there's going to have to be quite a significant supply chain training thing happen. And that's kind of across the board with building contractors, architects, designers, surveyors. It's been a bit of a perfect storm as well through COVID. People that have been working have been at home saving money. They want to do home improvement because they're not going on holiday. Combine that with some materials issues that we've had. Yeah, it's a perfect storm really. So you have high demand, low availability of people and materials. I think that's the biggest thing for us.
Okay, thank you. And Clara, the same question to you, because I think that the challenges you've highlighted are slightly nuanced on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say that the key challenge which LETI looks to answer is this definition of good challenge, and I think we really need to, as an industry, in the built environment industry, really reframe that, as I mentioned, to be based on in-use operational data, so that we can understand the energy performance of buildings in use, and then we can really work out which projects are achieving the net zero or not. So that's really important. And secondly, it's about speaking the same language, and that's how LETI is really trying to help, about providing guidance on definitions and guidance on terminology. And it just means that if we're all speaking the same language, then all the different developers can hear the same messages from the same consultants, and it's a lot clearer. And that's effectively why we started LETI, because as individual consultants, you know, if there's no, there's no good voluntary, there's no voluntary standard that aligns with net zero in the UK currently. And so because of that, there's nothing to point towards, which is why we've started LETI, so that all the experts and consultants across the UK can come together and say, okay, this is how we're defining good. And then when you have your consultant hat on, you can point towards it and deliver it on projects.
Thanks, Clara. And the same question to you, Audley, with your 30 years of summary within your 5 minutes, which what would you see as those core barriers?
Well, for me, in retrofit, we've refurbished hundreds of properties in the past. And it's about standardized details with the internal side, because you're going to lose internal space. Or if you get the airtightness on the outside, change the appearance of the building. And it's like everything else, it's about cost, you know. That's the elephant in the room, you know, the cost. Going forward with net zero for new build, I don't think it's any excuse. All new builds should be meeting EPC B as a minimum. We've met this without any renewables. So I think that for new build, EPC B is definitely the minimum for that. And with retrofit, it's a bit more of a challenge, but there's cost. And the government should remove VAT in addressing net zero for retrofit.
Okay, thanks, Audley. Yeah, I think the new build challenge is quite important. Clara, you got your hand up.
I guess I'd like to kindly support but amplify Audley's message in EPC is not a relevant rating when we're talking about getting to net zero. EPCs are based on cost and they're based on models. And of course, as Audley, you know, I agree with Audley, because it's not a disagreement, it's an agreeing that, you know, at least EPC for sure, but let's push beyond that. Let's use, you know, different frame it in terms of operational energy metrics and meet those net zero targets using an energy use indicator.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. And lastly to you, Marion.
Well, I think to be able to benchmark our project to each other under the performance of energy use intensity metrics, we absolutely need to understand what that means and how the calculation is made. And so we just need to work slightly differently. We need to understand, we need to really retrain. Sorry, that was my kind of core message, but I'm just saying it's not going to land on your desk by itself and in your brain by itself. You really need to have to do a little bit of effort. But I would really encourage you to join groups such as LETI, because it really shortcuts your whole exponential learning curve. While you meet others who know more than you and who are so willing to contribute to your learning curve. So just take part, don't be shy, really contribute to working groups across the UK, wherever you are. This is the best way to learn, but we do have to learn. So, yeah, this is really my core message is stop doing what you're doing, learn and do it better.
Great stuff. And just a reminder to the audience to send in any additional questions we want. We have got quite a few come through already. Somebody was asking about my grand tour poster, which is why I was laughing. So one of the questions is how does the panel think we can capture, manage and maintain the building attribute information we need to support retrofitting now and in the future? So this is obviously a data collection question. So would anybody like to put their hands up to answer that one first?
It's probably one for Lewis. Maybe.
Okay. Lewis, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, can do. I think the big thing is agreeing what the standards are for that data. For example, with our home retrofit planner software, if we know what the standard is, we can basically attach that standard to the data and make it useful outside of that tool as well. But until we know what that kind of agreed standard is, yeah, we can't really do that. So I think that's the biggest thing for us at the moment. Lots of talk around that stuff.
You're on mute, Donna.
Sorry, I thought I hit the button. And I think that's something that entities like Ordnance Survey can actually support as well, you know, particularly in terms of, you know, helping with some of those data standards and making sure there's consistency, particularly in terms of, you know, what that built environment from a digitization point of view should be. So one of the other questions which is kind of related to that, which again, Lewis, might be one for you, but please, other panelists, put your hands up, is there's a question more about the digital twin for BIM, which is the building modelling, and the PPR project. Is it an area level buildings and where data come from beyond the map? I'm not entirely sure what that one means, but Lewis, would you like to take that one first?
I'll give it a go. So I suppose in the context of our projects, they're small projects, they're houses, so, you know, small building scale. And also they're refurbishments. So if you were doing a new build, you would draw it up in a software that would automatically attach a lot of information to stuff. So we don't have that. So we don't work in 3D. Yeah, our building information model isn't a 3D model, and it's not tied to a location in that sense. I think that's the best I can do on that.
Does anybody else, Audley, do you have a, can you contribute to that one?
Yes, the first time I came across the digital twin was when I visited NASA in, I think it was 2003. And the person that instigated the digital twin, Michael Greaves. And what NASA was doing with the digital twin was building the satellite station, the International Space Station. So I found it very interesting, and now using it in construction. I think it's been around in various industry, in the automobile industry and the aerospace industry for many years, and it's only recently been recognized through BIM within the construction industry. So I think it's very good that you can actually create the model first before you actually produce, you know, the end product.
Yeah, thanks, Audley. And I think one of the other questions that I'd actually like to ask the panel is, you know, what do you think needs to happen in terms of financing all of this? So we're on Finance Day for COP. Okay, we know this is a big problem. What are going to be the key carrots and sticks that's going to enable this to really happen going forward? And I'm going to ask that question to Marion first.
Thanks, Donna. I mean, I think Audley mentioned the VAT issue for retrofits. At 20% VAT is completely non-starter, as opposed to almost 0% for new build. It's completely the other way around with the priorities that we need to have right now. So in many ways, we need to really turn around the taxation of construction for sure. The financing, and there's other things that might be really controversial, but I'm just going to mention it, is, for example, at the moment, the first few units of energy that you consume are very expensive, but the more you consume and the less you pay. I think it really needs to be drastically the other way around. And we need to, maybe, again, that's very controversial, but massively tax the really high consumer in energy, because I think that will eventually drive them to make more of an effort in using less energy and therefore emit less CO2. So, but there is also lots of things that needs to be done to protect those in fuel poverty, and there is 3 million of people living in fuel poverty. It's completely unacceptable in our age and century. So I think there is this, and then obviously the financing of the rest of the housing stock needs to have some very sexy financial tools. And the finance sector is extremely skilled at this sort of exercise. It just hasn't put very much effort in the retrofit because it's a big problem, because everybody lives in their home and have to move their kitchens and their beds to implement retrofits. And it's just not very appealing for most. But I think once the finance will get behind, like it has via the car financing industry, for example, I'm sure it'll become very successful. I think they just need to wake up. But to some extent, with the likes of the TCFD, etc., for larger projects, they're starting to really put together some systems in place that is going towards that. So I just encourage the finance industry to focus on retrofit.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. I think certain activities like some of the banking communities are already saying they're not going to put mortgages in for people with really low EPCs. That might be a stimulus as well to encourage people to actually really invest in the retrofitting. Clara, same question to you.
I think a statistic that I only realised about 6 months ago was that if you take your energy bill and you got your electricity at about 15p per unit and your gas is about 4 or 3 or 4, but actually a quarter of your electricity bill that goes to like your energy, the energy company doesn't get it, they have to spend it or give it back to the government on investing in renewables, right? That's already included within your electricity bill. That is not included within your gas bill. And that needs to change. You know, we need to massively make gas more expensive because people shouldn't be using it. And it's totally unfair that you pay for it with your electricity and not for your gas. So that's a real thing that I think needs to change. There's a lot of blended finance models for retrofit, and that's the real key. You know, we've got a lot of private homeowners that can pay for retrofit, some that can't at all, and it's when you bring those blended finance models together with loans or with grants that's really unlocks retrofit, I think, and making it easy. And it's not just financing the cost of retrofit, it's also providing incentives for people to retrofit, because it's the hassle factor that needs to be overcome there. And I think in terms of with the new builds, it doesn't really have to it doesn't cost that much more. So it's more about the supply chain there. And lastly, what was I going to say? I think I've forgotten that, but thank you.
That's okay, totally figurable. Audley, do you have anything you want to comment on the financing side?
Yes, institutional finance for ESG funding that a lot of landlords are tapping into, and for them to get ESG funding, and a number of housing associations has secured £200 million in ESG funding, but they have to bring all their stock up to an EPC level to get the full benefit of the discount of 1.7%. So I think that is the carrot angled in front of the social provider to make their houses much more energy efficient. So it is going to be, it's a difficult task.
Yeah. Perfect
solution.
No, absolutely. And I think you're right that the whole focus now on ESGs and TCFDs and the whole alphabet is going to be really, really key on driving some of these things forward. Now, Lewis, I haven't asked you that specific question because you've got quite a few questions for you in the chat. So there's a specific question here to you, Lewis, is that have you got a plan to extend outside of Manchester, and how would that happen?
So we do. We think that's through replication rather than just expanding from Manchester outwards. So we're working with a few organisations already. We've got an organisation in Devon, one in Bristol, and an organisation in Cumbria that we're working with. We also have a community shares offer out at the moment. So we've basically had massive demand in Manchester, which is great. But our team isn't big enough to service it all. So yeah, we want to expand the team here as well. So yeah. Yeah,
brilliant. Yeah, I don't know if this is a specific question, but it says here, I work for a company called CGA Simulation. and they have a digital twin, but doesn't have BIM, and they're trying to use it for planning infrastructure. So it's not a specific question, but I think it may be something for you, Lewis, to follow up on post this session. So one of the other questions that we have is around the circular economy piece. So we've been talking about getting building standards down to net zero, but what are your views on what happens with demolition? So some of the projects we've been running internally in Ordnance Survey are really trying to understand the building stock and whether or not there is reuse potential for any of this material. What does that look like? And especially if you're looking at demolition across a wider area. So have any of the panel had any thoughts around the whole circular economy piece and the reuse of materials from the current building stock? So I'm going to ask that question to Clara.
So yeah, I mean, it's a key thing, and embodied carbon and circular economy go hand in hand. Most of the time they work really well together. Some of the time they don't, and you need to work out if you want something that has a bit higher embodied carbon, but then can have more reuse potential and things like that. LETI are actually producing a think piece that's going to be put on our website in the next few weeks about circular economy and embodied carbon, and then we've got a full publication coming later next year. But it's really, I think when you think about new buildings, it's all about how can we dismantle them. Let's think of your building as a material bank, and make sure everything has mechanical fixtures so that you can reuse these resources as much as possible in the same level of servicing. There's those really nice diagrams which is like, you've got one service life, then you've got kind of recycling which loops, but we want circular economy, which means you don't downcycle, you always you keep things in that loop. So yeah, that sounds like a really interesting read. I look forward to that one. Same question to you, Marion.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a complete rethink of the way we design. And as an architect, if I could just take the point of view of the specifier of all these materials that we put in our building, whether it's a retrofit of a new build, we need to, when we look at the specification, first think, is it a recycled material? Has it got a high recycled content? I'm talking, for example, elements that you never see, such as metal stud-works. That's very easy perhaps to make sure that in your specification it has an extremely high level of recycled content, and then you suddenly embark and understand into the circularity of the materials that you use. There's also plasterboard that have 95% recycled content and this sort of thing. So once you've kind of in the frame of mind, whenever you see something that is raw material, you feel like, oh, what? No. So it's just a different way of seeing. It's just you have to kind of have a completely different approach, but it is feasible. There is supply issues, of course. Perhaps there's a need for some of the material supply chains to mature, for sure. But as more specifiers will be looking out for these products, the more it will be on offer. So yeah, that's it.
Great stuff. And the same question to you, Audley.
Yeah, our whole philosophy is around the circular economy, from the raw materials being extracted through the manufacturing, through the delivery, through to the assembly. And our building system is totally demountable, and it can be used and reconfigured at the end of its life to form other types of building. We call our solution the everlasting house, so that all the components be reused forever. So yes, we've signed up to the full circular economy, and that's what we do. Everything reusable.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And lastly to you, Lewis.
Obviously, if it's sensible to retrofit it, that's great. But yeah, I think I've covered it.
Okay, good. And I have a specific question here for Audley, and it says here, if Audley can build to the standards and benefit achieved, why can't all builders and developers do so? So Audley, why do you think people aren't building to those standards yet?
In the early days, I approached all the large volume house builders and it was all about, it can be done. You need a carrot and a stick. And it's just, yes, they can do it, but they have to meet their shareholders and make their biggest profit. But now slowly the tide is changing. And if you have a look at some of the large volume house builders, they're now adapting their old building philosophy and approach and building quality. I mean, we've demonstrated with that project that you can build defects-free projects. You know, it can be done with the right mindset and the right client behind him, demanding the standards that they require.
That's great to hear, actually. So we're coming up to time now. So I've got one last question, a quick fire round for all of you. And again, this is very related to obviously Ordnance Survey and Geovation. So really, how do you think geospatial and prop tech information and that sort of know-how and expertise can really help with all of your core missions? So I'm going to rapidly go over to Clara. Clara, is there anything we can do to help?
I think, understanding, data and the quantity of buildings and where, what level of energy consumption the buildings have and how they relate to each other in the wider systems is really important, because we need to sense check it with our carbon budgets. We've done that for operational energy, but not for embodied carbon yet. And so big data is really, really helpful to make sure that the targets that we're setting align to the carbon targets. And my last point is that all of the links to the LETI guides apparently have been put in the audience chat. So if you're in the audience, do click on those links. Thanks.
Fantastic. Quickly, Marion, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think, yes, data is king, and the world of retrofitting is not an exception, especially since every single house is a prototype. So the speed at which you can survey a building and get all the information that will enable a good retrofit to take place is really fundamental. So I think, unfortunately, at the moment, it's still very much DIY sort of approach, but if that can be simplified and made a lot quicker, it will definitely help a lot the rolling out en masse of retrofit throughout the country.
Great, thank you, Marion. And Audley?
Using the data to identify brownfield sites possible, a quick solution. And then before we start building on greenbelt land. So for me, it's about developing on brownfield site and using that tech and that data for that.
Yeah, great. Lastly, Lewis, quickly, what are your thoughts?
We're interested in the use of LiDAR and whether we can, things like the new iPhone have a LiDAR sensor in them. So can they be used to help us survey houses? So if anyone's doing that, yeah, we'd love to hear about it.
Great stuff there. Well, there's an ask out to the audience there then. Anybody with LiDAR technology, get in touch with Lewis. So I'd like to say a huge thank you to our panelists. I thought that was a really interesting discussion. I know I'm a geek, but anyway. We're going to now rapidly hand over to Chris Parker again. We have probably a record-breaking session now for the number of people on the panel and on the sessions. So again, huge thank you to everybody, and I hope you enjoyed our panelist session. Thank you.
Hi, Donna and our panelists, Marion, Lewis, Audley and Clara, thanks very much for an absolutely fascinating session there. So much useful information, even for me as just a householder. So really fascinating, thanks. I took away Audley's expression, humans must reduce carbon or carbon will reduce humans. That must keep us thinking positively, I think, about what we need to do. So thanks very much. Thanks, Donna, for chairing that. Thank you to the panelists and thank you to all those who asked questions as well. That's really useful. Thanks very much indeed. Next up, second half, we've got a startup showcase. So our role at Geovation is to help startups develop, launch and grow their startups for positive impact. and we want to get started on that quickly. Each startup here has 3 minutes to pitch, and we'll hear a noise when it's time to wind up. So do try and keep to the 3 minutes. And we look forward to the pitches. And the nice segue coming up is, first off, is Grace Manning-Marsh from LandTech, who we were privileged to help in about 2014, I think. But, Grace, over to you.
Thank you very much. I will do my best to keep to the 3 minutes without talking ridiculously fast. So at LandTech, we realised the impact that the real estate sector has had and continues to have on our planet, with our sector consuming 40% of the world's energy, as was mentioned previously. At LandTech, our mission is to empower real estate developers with the tools to make the most decisions throughout the development process. And these right decisions have to be sustainable decisions. We have built products to help find the right site for a development, harmonise planning policy, and assist in funding. We are now the market leader and have just received 42 million in Series A funding to build out our offering internationally. We are currently 140 people strong and growing, and we're firm believers that with the right information and data, we can all make the most environmentally sustainable decisions. The first step to solving a problem, as many of you probably know, is knowing what it is. And at LandTech, we want to shine a light on the issues across the sector by advocating for more open data landscape globally. We already work with 120 renewable energy and power developers, as well as companies building electric vehicle charging stations to find the one thing universal to development projects: land. Finding the right land is crucial to creating an environmentally friendly and sustainable real estate ecosystem. Open data enables developers to understand where they can connect to existing infrastructure and invest in existing communities, as well as not overlooking suitable and sustainable opportunities because of a lack of ownership, policy, or planning information. We also know that reusing buildings is much more sustainable than building new ones. That's why we have standardized building use, land reg, and VOA data to identify the right permitted development opportunities. So we are here today to represent a change in this global community. LandTech is an evolution of how real estate can be done. And because of our success, we are the biggest collective of home builders in the country. We are the very first community of over 2,500 developers, planners, and other real estate professionals. And this makes us uniquely placed to facilitate conversations around sustainable development practices and advocate better connections between regulators and developers, with data working as the enabler. We pledge to implement a progressive sustainability commitment across our own business, but we need more. There needs to be regulatory change to allow us to put data where it belongs, at the forefront of fighting the problems we're all facing today. And our mission is not limited to just one country. So as our business grows, we're calling from the same action across all nations. Let's open up real estate data across the world, whether that's land ownership data in Germany, permit data in the US, or property boundaries in Africa. But with the visibility of data for everyone, collaboration between regulators and developers, and with the power of a global community, we can ensure that we build a future we are all proud of. LandTech is already building the global community, and we are proof that opening data helps to get more homes built and a stronger renewable sector. But we need our governments to open up more property data so we can all make the changes now at this pivotal moment that will benefit generations to come. Okay, thank you. Hopefully I did that in your 3 minutes.
You did that very well, Grace. Thanks very much. A lot of information and fantastic to hear what you're now doing. Thanks very much indeed. Next up, we have Ed Cooper from BioCap. So Ed, over to you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ed Cooper, the founder and CEO of BioCap. We're a social enterprise and charity working at how we can use natural solutions in the farmed landscape to combat climate change and biodiversity loss. It is clear that natural solutions will have a key role in climate change mitigation. The UK Climate Change Committee and the Natural Capital Committee have concluded this, and there's now a number of carbon-linked targets out there. At the same time, we need to reverse biodiversity loss and in the UK, implement biodiversity net gain policy. In our region, West Berkshire, there is an environmental plan to get the region to net zero by 2030, and there's an associated budget for the use of natural solutions to sequester carbon. But there is a danger that single issue agendas such as tree planting could dominate, and actually detrimental work might take place in our countryside. What we need is a shared, coherent and balanced vision on what to do where and what to do and where to do it. BioCap is seeking to establish a trusted local marketplace for carbon offsetting and biodiversity net gain. This will be informed by data and local knowledge and driven and set out in a spatial plan. We're involving all the key local players to develop this coherent shared vision. And in the face of these global problems, we will also provide some meaningful and tangible projects and outcomes that the local community can support and participate in. We're building future capacity to manage our countryside in an open and accountable manner. And we also feel that ongoing monitoring and compliance of carbon and biodiversity projects will be much clearer to all if it's done at a local level. And thereby we can build a trusted system that's running in a coherent way in a local region. And we're piloting this in West Berkshire. BioCap was set up in April 2020. We've been on the Geovation programme, which worked very well for us. And we've just completed an EU project actually where we've shown that with artificial intelligence and data, we can remotely score diversity in grasslands. We have just completed our draft opportunity map, and this is based on about 40 GIS data sets. It's a spatial plan for West Berkshire, and it's the basis for pragmatic decisions on what we could choose to do and where we would do it. You know, where to plant trees, where to create wetlands, where to restore peat soils, etc. The next step in this is to quantify the carbon and biodiversity that's embodied within the plan and then iterate it with our partners. Oh, I've not moved. There we go. Sorry, there we go. We have set up and are running a regional West Berkshire Natural Solutions Delivery Partnership. And we're now in the process of identifying projects with landowners and also finding local businesses that want to offset carbon and contribute to these projects. So we are developing the approach and the platform and the methodology. We want to prove this approach in our West Berkshire pilot. We're looking at how we can intelligently automate the use of data for future rollout. We believe that technology and local activity can build a robust and locally managed compliance and monitoring regime. And we want to replicate the West Berkshire model and export it region by region. And we're currently seeking resources and funds to prove the model and start engaging with other regions. Thank you very much.
Ed, thank you very much indeed. Fascinating project as well, and you're in my catchment where I grew up actually. Thanks very much. Next up is BKwai and Sakthi Salva Salva Kumararan. Sorry, Sakthi.
That's okay.
Over to you.
Right. Okay, there we go. So my name is Sakthi, and I'm the founder and CEO of a company called BKwai. As a bit of background, I've spent over a decade working in the construction sector, either designing the built environment, getting it constructed, or trying to keep it safe in the long run. That includes also doing a PhD in applying construction technology into practice. And if I can click, there we go. Oops. Right, and so through all of that experience, I've seen firsthand both massive problems as well as huge opportunities. So we're increasingly seeing larger amounts of data becoming available, but not being used. As an industry, we love Excel, and Excel is great when you have a few data points. When it's not helpful is when you have tens of thousands of sensors, or you're trying to make use of the new and improving resolutions of satellites. You have far too much data to interpret yourself. So you end up seeing highly skilled engineers struggling to handle the rudiment of Microsoft Excel and understand the data, but an insufficient number of tools to help them get value from it. Oops. Sorry. And so in the worst cases, we're seeing bridges collapse or structures fail, or increasingly the effects of climate change impacting our structures, which means that in addition to safety problems, we have inefficiencies, we have rework, and we have huge contributions into carbon and other problems like that. And so as a company, what we're trying to do is provide data insights. So I don't know if you know this analogy, but it's based on a story about blind people touching various parts of an elephant. One person thinks they're touching a spear, one person thinks they're touching a rope, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not until you put all of those different views together that you really understand the full picture of what's happening to a structure. You don't understand the full elephant in the room, if you will. And so what BKwai is doing is combining data from multiple sources, from site sensors, local environmental data, remote satellite data, and trying to deploy advanced data techniques in multimodal learning, if you want to use the technical terms, and try and give asset owners and construction companies warning signs to put data insights in people's hands quickly. So we're a spin out from the University of Cambridge, from the Center for Smart Infrastructure and Construction, and we have used data techniques developed in academia, but have built it into a software platform so that people can use that live in practice. We work before, during, and after things are constructed. And so all of these work towards this sort of net zero ambition. Historically, we can make better informed decisions using historical satellite data. In construction, we can avoid mistakes, keep sites safe, and avoid rework, the construction sector being one of the biggest contributors to carbon. And in the long term, we can make data informed management decisions. So rather than reconstructing or knocking down structures, we can understand their existing capacity and how the natural environment is impacting them. And so we're able to provide not just sensor data, but just to quickly show you, there's things like satellite data that can monitor millimeters of movement from space. We're also able to use forecasting and move that forward so that people can make better informed decisions on how sites operate. And overall, we're working with some of the biggest names in constructions to provide them data value, predictions, and help create smarter, safer, more resilient built environments. Thank you very much.
Exactly. Thank you very much indeed. It's right on time as well. Fantastic. Thank you very much. And so next up is Folarity with Martin Warren. Over to you, Martin.
Oh, it is coming with. Great. Thanks, Chris. So, hi, I'm Martin Warren, the founder of Folarity. Today, I'm just going to quickly take you through some of the projects we've worked on over the last few years that all aim to help improve the natural environment. So when I first started Folarity, I normally had to throw some big numbers up here to try and convince people about the need for tree planting, because the UK is one of the least forested countries in Europe. But I think finally everyone is in agreement that we need to increase our forest coverage. So that's great. However, there's several barriers to doing that. One of the barriers is having enough skilled forest managers to plan and plant those forests. Since we can't train new forest managers overnight, we decided to look at how we can help existing forest managers to work more efficiently and make better informed decisions. We found that the managers were using a range of different tools. This is going from paper notebooks to Word, Excel, and GIS programs. This meant that all their data was scattered around, and a comprehensive overview of a single forest was difficult to generate, never mind the 30 to 50 forests that a typical manager is looking after. To help address these barriers, we created Forest Planner. It's been built from the ground up in collaboration with forest managers to fit into their current workflow rather than forcing them to adopt a whole new methodology. It works by bringing key stakeholders together so everyone is on the same page and has access to the data they need. That could be internal data or third-party data sets like TravelAi's or Ordnance survey maps, along with integrations with third-party tools and AI systems. Additionally, providing this central hub, we're hopeful we can provide an easy-to-use system that other forestry-based products can build on top of, speeding up their time to market and allowing the whole industry to scale up quicker and focus on getting more trees in the ground. While building up Forest Planner, we became part of an Innovate UK project to create a new carbon offsetting marketplace. Our contribution to this project was to get a machine learning system capable of counting the number of conifer and broadleaf trees and then work out the volume based off that. This is all linked to just using simple RGB sensors on the drones to reduce costs. Once the project was wrapped up and the carbon marketplace started to scale, we went back to working on Forest Planner. At that point, we been talking to sort of commercial forestry operations, we also reached out to charities and organizations doing more ecosystem restoration. After talking to them, we decided there was an opportunity for another application to sit alongside Forest Planner, but more focused on their needs. So we've begun working on an ecosystem tracker. It's designed to help you plan, monitor, and share ecosystem changes over time. We're starting with forests, as that's kind of our background, but aiming to expand into other ecosystems as we partner with more organizations and further understand their needs. So that's the progress we've made in a few short years. We're really excited to see how these two tools grow, and we're looking for more organizations and people to come on board, especially people keen to use Ecosystem Tracker, as that's taking its first baby steps out in the world. If you'd like to learn more, please feel free to reach out with the details there. And thank you very much. I'll pass you back to Chris.
Martin, thank you very much indeed. Right on time too. Thank you. And next we'll hear from Tom Pearson of the Land App. Over to you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. Hello, everyone. My name is Tom, and I'm here to tell you about how the Land App, an intuitive cloud-based mapping platform, can become the key that unlocks a sustainable future for the UK and the wider world. Here in the UK, we find ourselves in a troubling position. Our landscapes are becoming rapidly degraded, yet funding for farmers and land managers are in decline. To fix this, now is the time to connect funders to landowners, to come together and catalyse a natural capital market that can sequester carbon, increase biodiversity net gain, and build back our beloved landscapes. We believe that this can only be achieved through the power of spatial data, by mapping everyone onto the same page. So, what do? We help people map a baseline of their holding, create a future land management plan, collaborate together under one single source of truth, and utilise our network of professionals to get funding for the correct land use decisions. We believe that this creates a virtuous loop which has the ability to elevate the state of nature on farms, across landscapes, and around the world. The first step of this process is understanding what sits within each holding. To do this, the Land App has teamed up with a number of partners, including Ordnance Survey, to produce an instant best guess of what habitat currently exists. Within the tool, users can work with ecologists and advisors to confirm and amend this baseline, providing accessibility, accuracy, and insight within their holding. Coming to the second step, and in order to mobilise the sector, the Land App incentivises users to future scenario plan for their holding, creating a vision of best practice for themselves and their land. Our easy-to-use GIS system makes preparing for future funding both effortless and inspiring. And once holdings have these digital versions of their farm, land managers are encouraged to come together in order to create pipeline projects to deliver restoration and enhancement at a landscape scale. This gives us the best chance to really have a positive impact on our future. By connecting those that love the land, we can work together to turn this vision into a reality. To date, we have over 45% of English farmland mapped within the Land App network, including land managers, farmers, facilitators, estates, and rural professionals. So if you want to invest in groups that mobilise farmers, or if you have an understanding of how nature-based solutions can help to achieve your goals, then please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Tom, too. Another excellent presentation on time. Just like to remind those listening in that there's the opportunity to ask questions as well. So we'll see those in the chat as they come through. Tom, thanks very much. And next up is Arthur Kay from Skyroom. Are you there, Arthur?
Yes, I am.
Over to you.
Thank you. So the starting point for Skyroom is really this quote: "Buy land, they're not making it anymore." And what we decided to do in terms of understanding that the key issue with housing in the UK is not necessarily, and by issue both economic and environmental issue, is not necessarily what we're building or how expensive it is to build those things. It's typically the cost of land and where we're building. So in London, for example, a typical house or flat, 70% of the cost is actually taken up through the cost of the land. And so we set out to try and solve this problem. And what Skyroom does is we are a award-winning technology design and development company, and we work with major landowners to help them maximize the social, environmental, and economic value of their portfolio. And specifically what we do is that landowners, particularly local authorities, housing associations in great estates, own large swathes of the city. In fact, it will come as not a surprise to many of you that major landowners who actually own much, much more land than individuals. In London, for example, over half the land is owned by large organizations rather than individuals. And so we partner with those organizations and help them originate, i.e. find suitable sites for airspace development, then design those projects, and then finance and help them deliver those airspace developments. In terms of specifically how we go about this, we bring three different areas to the market, or to what they don't have already. They have the land, or in this case, the buildings. And what we provide is an approach to be able to deliver a positive social, economic, and environmental impact. We bring three different technologies. The first around how we can identify and map their buildings. The second, a proprietary podium system, which helps us build around and above the existing building and thus unlocking the airspace. And thirdly, different modular technologies for housing, which mean that we're able to rapidly install modular homes that are otherwise take a long time to build on site. And thirdly, expertise. Our team is primarily made up of architects and designers. And then finance. Last year, we raised the £100 million Key Worker Homes Fund, which gives us the financial firepower to be able to invest into some of these projects through means of this £100 million ESG private equity fund. In terms of some projects that we're working on at the moment, this is a map of London with some of the projects that we're currently progressing through the planning system. This is a project, a small scale project that we're working on in Bermondsey at the moment, 15 homes for key workers in the airspace of existing buildings. Here in central London on Charing Cross Road. Here, over 100 homes in North London Borough in partnership with the local authority. And our key focus as a business is how we're going to be growing over the coming years is really trying to form these partnerships with major landowners, particularly local authorities and housing associations, to help them, to provide them with the tools, the technologies and the approaches to unlock and deliver airspace developments above their existing buildings. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Arthur. Fascinating again. And congratulations on your £100 million raise as well. Fantastic to hear. Next up, we have Terrafirma with Dr. Timothy Farwell. Over to you, Tim.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Yes, Tim Farwell here. And what I would love to talk to you about today is the work that we're doing with a whole range of companies, a lot of insurance companies and mortgage lenders, property professionals, helping them to understand hidden ground hazards and how these are going to change with our changing climate. So we look at, in terms of ground hazards, we look at a number of different types. Coastal erosion, so houses falling off the edge of a cliff into the sea, or subsidence where they crack as soils shrink and swell. Maybe landslides, or even these really scary things like houses falling into mines and voids, which are already there in the ground, but just people don't know about them. Let's see if I can move this on. Yeah, so what do? Well, we work with these companies And most of them, frankly, at the start, don't really have a good idea of which of their investments, which of their properties are at risk from these types of ground hazards. So we help them to understand the principles that are going on. Our science team get involved. And then we quantify the risk that their properties face now and how that risk is going to change as the climate shifts to this warmer, wetter winter, hotter, drier summer climate, which is coming our way. And the reason we do this is so that people can understand and then reduce their risk. That's really what we're all about. I only have time to talk about 2 of these ground risks, and those very briefly. So I've put a QR code on the bottom of the slide, and I'd love to connect with any of you who find this of interest, and we can properly dive into detail afterwards. But subsidence is one of my passions, and here we're looking at the way that the ground moves and responds to changing moisture contents. And what we're seeing is as our climate moves to this hotter, drier summer conditions, more and more of the soils around the UK are drying out to greater depths. And this is exposing properties which you wouldn't normally think of being at risk from subsidence. So further north, we see more and more properties have a growing risk of subsidence. This pink map just shows the areas of increasing risk over the coming decades. The second hazard I'd love to just briefly talk about is coastal erosion. And what I love about this is just showing mapping the coastline from 2003 to the present day. And then our national ground risk model picks up and projects where the coastline is likely to be at different points in the coming decades. So here we're showing the 2050s. And you can see more and more properties at risk of falling in the sea. And if you're very careful, you can see these roads on the beach from OpenStreetMap. They're still marked there, but they're no longer really in existence. This just shows how quickly the coast is eroding. I'll see if I can move on. So what we can do is for each of these properties, identify the types of hazards which will be impacting on these properties at different points in time and help people to come to sensible decisions about the risks they want to take when they're investing in that. So I just encourage you, let's connect and take this to a deeper level, and we can look at your hazards impacting on your investments or properties and just help you quantify the risks which are facing you and your business in the coming years. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Timothy. I'm going to go back and check those cracks on my road as well with added interest. Thank you. Next up is Topolytics and Michael Groves. Good to see you, Michael.
Good to see you, Chris. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Groves. I'm the founder and chief exec of Topolytics. And we're a data aggregation and analytics business. And we are making the world's waste visible, verifiable, and valuable. And the reason we're doing that, the reason we think there's an opportunity is that you think about waste on a global basis, it's a really complex system of multiple materials movements. So material being generated in multiple locations, moved by different sort of players, commercial and otherwise, then moved through various sites where that material is transformed or it's stored or it's processed. And then at some point, something happens to that material. So it might be kind of put into a landfill, it might be incinerated, it might be recycled or recovered. But the problem is at the moment that industry and that system, the data is of very mixed quality, and there's very little visibility through that system. So consequently, the outcomes for all of that material on a global basis are quite poor. And more than 60% of that material is still going to a landfill or a waste dump or is leaking into the environment. So what we're looking to do as Topolytics is to basically build a better version of the truth. And we're doing that through our data platform called WasteMap, which we've developed over the last few years. And WasteMap uses a range of different analytical techniques in order to sort of generate insights for companies and organizations that produce waste and want to know what's happening to it, recyclers and others within that industry that are doing something to that material, and then governments and cities that are interested in what is then happening to that material as a sort of as a regulatory sort of oversight. So we've built a position in that market. Some people call it smart waste, some people call it waste tech. And we've got building an ecosystem of partners, of customers and technology partners and industry partners in order to sort of take waste mapping out into that global marketplace. So effectively what we're doing is we're aggregating and ingesting data from a whole range of different sort of sources, bring that into WasteVat where we normalize and process that data, and then we're generating insights for our customers. And those customers really fall into sort of three categories. We have companies and organizations that are producing waste, companies and organizations that are doing something for that waste, and then governments which are setting policy or oversight over that material. Thank you very much.
Mike, thanks very much indeed. And as a geographer, waste is a resource in the wrong place. I think we. I know you recognise that. Thanks very much. And next up, we have TravelAi and Zach, Andreas Zachariah, and Zach, I think you prefer to be called. Over to you, Zach. How are you doing, Zach?
Sorry, yes, unmute. Hi, so I'm Zach, and I'm a co-founder of TravelAi. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Zach. Thanks.
Yes, okay. Yes, we're a European space agency incubator spin-out. We create highly granular mobility data to accelerate the decarbonisation and optimization of transport, using a scale item like the smartphone to solve a scale problem. We create multimodal, multi-country, and multi-purpose data that's privacy and GDPR compliant. So this video animation shows the output from our proprietary software stack, which manages the battery drain, the sampling of device sensors. It requires no user input. It leverages our transport-specific AI, which is being built on millions of miles of training data, to automatically identify the mode of transport in over 50 countries. That's car, train, metro, tram, bus, plane, and active travel like walking and cycling. And we can't manage what we don't measure, and as the biggest emitter, transport needs tackling. So with CarbonDiem, we make it effortless to compute some of the hardest emissions, whether it be for ESG or Scope 3 reporting needs, a tool for increasing the employee-employer relationship while empowering individuals to make informed decisions. Our various USPs include the level of personalization that we offer, our automation to make learning to become green effortless, the fact that we're non-judgmental in how we show the data, we give mode-by-mode breakdowns, we calculate your calories burnt from active travel, and we even give individual leg details showing the carbon and calories for each element. It's a technology stack that has many use cases, and one of them is a automatic digital travel diary to scale up household travel surveying that we did in collaboration with infrastructure owners, National Highways. And it's one of many where we've successfully won and led over 3.3 million in public, private, and collaborative projects since 2016. We ask you to please try out CarbonDiem from either the iOS or Android stores. Our COP26 announcement is that we're going to be having a major update to CarbonDiem. We'll be launching CarbonDiem EV. This will be a B2C and B2B tool for accelerating an ICE to EV migration. Our call to action is seeking EV and charging network partners, as well as seed investors in fintech, ESG green tech, and mobility. Thank you very much, and please catch me either in the networking space or at zach@travelai.co.uk.
Zach, thanks very much indeed. I think we'll need to ensure that everybody can see everybody's contact details at the end of this as well. Thanks very much. And last but by no means least is Daniel Mohammed of Urban Intelligence. Daniel, over to you.
Hi there, Chris. Thanks very much. Hi guys, I'm Daniel. I'm an urban planner, and just to kind of set the scene, if you like, I grew up playing games like SimCity, and I thought perhaps naively that the real world of town and urban planning was a lot like this, where there was lots of data and intelligent dashboards where you as a planner, mayor, citizen, etc., would be able to have the data at your fingertips to make wiser, better, more sustainable solutions and decisions. Unfortunately, I was confronted with the reality that much of the planning system actually looks like this. And the reason that this is a problem is that it's really, really difficult for the people with decision-making powers to actually forecast, to fully understand what they're actually dealing with, and to actually get citizens on board with the process of planning. And what that tends to mean is that we make decisions that suit the emotional comfort of today's generation, but also they've very much made with the next political election in mind. Not just that, but planners have not just climate change to actually consider, but they're also considering multiple other thoughts as part of their consideration. The good news is that we have had another way of actually interacting with citizens and having intelligent leveling up type conversations with them. And a really good example of this is the recent COVID 5 p.m. briefings, where obviously we leveled up, made difficult decisions. And in my opinion, this is the kind of approach that we need to take to actually doing our urban planning and making lots of the decisions that will help us to lead towards net zero. So who are Urban Intelligence and where do we come into this? Well, Urban Intelligence is a property technology business. What we do is we collect, monitor and analyze really large big data sets that enable us to undertake quite comprehensive citywide and region-wide analysis. We help developers and public sector and private sector and third sector organizations to identify sites, to appraise them, and to actually visualize the potential impact of those developments on the wider area. So what we're trying to do is and what we're going to be doing over the next few months is actually changing some of the way that we help not just our planners who are clients, but actually we're trying to widen the scope of the services we offer to enable citizens to understand the pros and cons or the trade-offs that are going to be necessary in making more sustainable decisions. So it might be, for example, that if you're building a suburban edge of town development, that might lead to more car usage, or on the flip side, if you're doing more of an intense development in the city centre, then that could lead to additional cost. We're not saying that there's either a pro or a con of development, but what we want to do is to facilitate the conversation to enable smarter decisions that have got the future in mind. So just to give you a quick rundown, these are some of our clients. If you are interested in thinking about a smarter way, a digital way to do your planning, we'd be really happy to have a conversation with you following this event. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Daniel, for that presentation too. 10 great presentations, huge amount of information. Can I ask those viewers watching to send in questions via the Q&A box, and also network with each other in the chat box too, please. And I wanted to give the startups the opportunity to ask questions of each other too. I recognise you put in a huge amount of work here, and I'm not sure that you otherwise get the opportunity to ask each other questions as well. So whilst people might come up and think about a few questions, I'd just like to tell you a little bit more about Geovation. I think we've helped we've helped something like over 130 companies from idea to start up and scale up to a degree as well. I think we've seen some pretty big ones here. We've helped create over 1,600 jobs through the startup activity. I think something like 1.7 million in grant funding received. I think over 130 million in startup funding raised as well, a community of 1,800 practitioners, entrepreneurs, innovators, data expertise, all sorts of other expertise as well. Something like 700 online events held. We run 3 accelerator streams, one twice a year with Ordnance Survey, one twice a year with the Land Registry for England and Wales, and one twice a year with the Registers of Scotland. And some of our speakers today have been through those respective accelerators too. In fact, they've all been through one or another. And we also have 5 partner hubs around the country in Bristol, Cardiff, Birmingham, and Manchester and Glasgow as well. No, sorry, Edinburgh. Thank you. So that tells you a little bit more about us. You can join Geovation as a member at geovation.uk, and we'd be delighted to see you either remotely, but preferably in person one day. We look forward to seeing you at Geovation, either at our London hub or in one of our partner hubs. So that's a little bit more about us. We also hold showcases twice a year. So similar to these events as well, where you get the chance to listen to the startups we're supporting, and there's the opportunity to ask questions of startups and make connections as well. Can I invite all our founders back on to put their cameras on, if you like, and come back onto the screen. If you're all, oh, that's good to see you. Yeah, that's great. You're coming back on. I think that's all of you there. Thanks very much. So we've got a couple of questions coming in. One of the things I felt I'm listening to as we talk, and forgive me, perhaps as a geographer, but it seems that everything that is connected around X, Y, Z, so connected around place. And it seems to me that you're all also collaborating as well. You're looking at solving new problems in old ways through collaboration, using both geospatial data and other data. So I wanted to ask you, who else would you like to be collaborating with? What other data do you need that you're not getting, if you like? But also, anyone can come in on that conversation, but also what questions would you ask of each other as well? There seems a lot of overlap here too.
Shall I dive in there? One thing I would love to see more movement in is when we are building new houses, that we do that as much as possible in a climate resilient manner. So, I spoke a bit about subsidence, ground movement, and the way that we engineer ourselves out of this problem at the moment is we pour huge amounts of concrete into the ground, and it's been calculated that between 40 and sometimes even up to 60% of the entire carbon emissions from the building comes from foundation design. So one thing that I would love to see is a shift in the industry towards carbon sensitive foundation design. And it may be through over-engineered foundations becoming standard, a pile and beam foundation where that's appropriate, so that we can move away from this concept of just pouring concrete in the ground. So yeah, for those of you in the building space, I'd love to see and chat with you guys about what your ideas are in that case.
Great, thanks. Thanks very much, Tim. And I believe Audley illustrated how they're using, they're minimizing the amount of foundation they put in the ground in the Buildeco properties as well. So any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, so from our side, a lot of the data that we look for and we use is, a lot of it comes from government data and government standards, but there is a huge disparity in terms of how you can get that data, the quality that data is in. If any standards have been set, obviously we're looking at a lot of things to do with planning and policy. So we have, over 350 local authorities just in England. Each one of those has its own system of way of doing things. There's no standardized format of that. So a better push from sort of central government to ensure that we can actually get to a point where there can be standards of data. We can ensure that the data that is provided is clean, which therefore means that we can actually then spend our time taking that data, turning it into insights that's then useful for people, rather than having to spend a lot of time just gathering that data and building tools to gather the data. It'd be great if we can get to a place, and I'm sure everybody, you know, in the different data sets that people are looking for, if you could just, you know, all that data is open, there's then much greater transparency of that data. You can obtain it, and then you can go on and do much more clever things with that data for users.
Grace, thanks very much, and some really useful points there. And so ease of access, ease of use in order to effect change. Grace, thanks very much for those points. Zach, over to you.
Yeah, hi there. So I think thinking about the mobility space, and what I'd love to come out of COP26 is that we don't subsidize fossil fuels in the mobility space. It's kind of insane that as they're then thinking, oh, well, how are we going to introduce and who's going to pay for these new green solutions? They then want to bill us again. It's like, why do you need to pick my pockets twice? So I'd like to see the end of subsidies for fossil fuels and instead put that into renewables and clean tech, and to actually look at the risk profile of clean tech versus continuing to fund fossil fuels. And if I'm thinking about something from the geospatial realm, we've just done a round of work around trying to make highly granular geospatial data more privacy aware. And having LSOAs in the UK is a wonderful way to describe a space without needing, because of course it's what you use in the census. And I'd love to see something like a LSOA style socioeconomic parceling of land in other geographies, like for instance Europe, because it would allow you to, or it would allow one to look at highly granular geospatial data without getting down to the street, because the LSOA generally is satisfying enough when one's trying to slice and dice behavior and socioeconomic data.
Thanks very much, Zach. Would you just like to explain LSOA for those outside of UK?
Oh goodness, that means I need to remember large spatial
lower super output areas. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so it's a census unit of some sort. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
No, not at all. Thanks, Zach. Thanks very much indeed. And any other thoughts from our presenters? We've got some questions for you, and maybe we could come back to that. So, got a question here to all of you. What is one outcome of COP and the events surrounding it, such as this, which would most help you with your own vision, what you're trying to achieve yourselves? That comes from Claire. Thanks very much. And can I ask somebody to start that one? Michael, would you like to say something on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there hasn't been enough of a focus on materials, particularly in relation to carbon emissions. If you think about, the embedded carbon in all of the kind of goods and products that we're manufacturing and then using, and then obviously those products or that packaging is going into the waste system, it's quite a significant contributor to, sort of overall sort of carbon emissions. So I think we shouldn't divorce materials from that whole piece about net zero. Obviously, it's a big focus on energy and mobility, et cetera, but I think that's certainly something that I think there could have been more of a focus on materials, I think.
And are you able to get, or by implication, is it difficult to get data on materials currently?
Well, that's what we do. I mean, we're capturing that data, and that's our business. But one of the reasons we're doing that is that because that kind of data, in terms of whatever might be available as a sort of open data sets or sort of freely available, is not really there. So that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to sort of capture some of that kind of granular data ourselves. So.
Great, thanks, Michael. Anybody else on that point?
I think specifically to what Claire asked, which was what would help our vision. I think most of us are in the realms of kind of clean tech, green tech, and I think it's that thing where the finance community continues to support fossil fuel projects because essentially these aren't unknowns, these are knowns, and the guarantee that you will hit oil, that you will strike coal is almost guaranteed. The outcome of, for instance, a clean tech startup or an emerging technology, there are more unknowns. But the paradox in my mind is that it's all very well that you can guarantee getting coal or oil out of the ground. There is an entire risk curve that goes beyond it. Yet the downside of a clean tech project failing is the loss of the investment. The upside is you're addressing the big problem. You're solving the problem. Whereas the other thing is just an accelerant. It's just more alcohol or petrol into the fire.
Hi, Chris.
Ed, over to you.
Yeah, one of the dangers of COP is that the focus is on global all the time, which is understandable, but the standards and things that get developed make small local delivery difficult and maybe even impossible, and the financial burden imposed upon smaller projects could be too great. And one of the things I would like to see is a recognition that regional projects with local communities can make a significant contribution. A lot of the resource and the expertise already exists to deliver things, but there is a danger that with carbon standards and measurement and monitoring and compliance, that it gets so burdensome that people cannot actually do the work they want to do. So there needs to be a recognition that robust ideas and innovation can take place at the small level, and it can still be robust, it can still be measured, and it can still be a good contributor. So there needs to be space for smaller projects to get going and take place.
That's a very interesting point, and the ability then to scale up and share the best of those approaches.
Yeah.
So think globally, but act locally, and then scale the best of that.
Can I just add to that? I think there's an element of like one of the other speakers was saying about what are we funding and shifting our support for carbon heavy industries. So this is where I guess Tom and Tim from the Land App come in, in terms of managing, how do we transition the agricultural industry towards a more carbon neutral, carbon negative industry? There are massive wins to be had there. So integrating, spatial data sets like we do at Terrafirma with land management practices that you guys do at the Land App, with housing, building design, there's in this room, there's a whole cohort of people who can speak into this situation and go, well, what can we actually do to transform this industry, which is highly polluting and carbon positive at the moment, into something which is much more positive for the climate.
Tim, thanks very much on that. I hope you're able to meet up with Tom at the Land App. And Tom, I don't know whether you want to say a little bit on that and come back on the sort of cross-cutting events that you've been running through last year.
Yeah, I mean, just to answer, follow on from Tim's point. I think the difficulty with what we're finding with, and this is also kind of coming out of COP, is that I think a lot of landowners and land managers that we speak to feel they don't have the power at the moment to transform and to put the carbon back in the soil. And I think there's a sense that people are out of control and that there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And I think what we'd like to see from COP and conversations like this, which I think are so important, people coming together. I think we want to see a vision and people can take it into their own hands through data and these kind of startups which we create, giving the owners back to these landowners, and they can make the changes they want. Also, kind of talking on Ed's point, I think it's really important that they're given the control to do what they want in their landscape, and that can scale up. And I think these people in their areas, whether in the Yorkshire Dales or the Surrey Hills, they know what's best for their area. And I think, the vast majority of people we speak to, they're really passionate about where they live. They're really passionate about their land. And I think it's the ability to go ahead and say, well, here's the keys to your land for the first time in a while. And I think that's a very important thing, not just the material changes that come out of things like COP, but the discourse that's moved back onto the individual, I think is important.
Thanks very much, Tom. Martin, whilst we're on land and what happens on it, did you want to, you've got anything else you'd want to add there?
I think my only point would be, yes, I agree with all the stuff around stakeholders, and I think especially I hadn't seen Ed stuff before, and I found that quite interesting. I think it's how you engage those stakeholders. I mean, one of the issues you find in forestry is you're dealing with long time periods, like 25, 30 years to get a fully established forest. How do you help people understand that we're doing these changes today and you're not going to see the benefit, but in 30 years time, you'll have this ecosystem. And in a culture where everything is like you want instant gratification and you can build something new and shiny there that they can go and use, versus, hey, wait, and then, a long period of time, it'll be much of the benefit. I think engaging stakeholders and having the data that we can start to show them and visualize and take them through that journey is very important.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Tim, been asked, what can we do to influence the conveyancing sector to change behaviours? That was for you, Tim.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it starts with education. Everything, well, for me, look, I'm an ex-academic, so everything always starts with education. One of the things that I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention this, so don't shoot me, Terrafirma people, if I do. But one of the things that we've got planned for the coming months is a launch of a new education portal for the conveyancing sector to help lawyers, conveyancers understand these risks, and then link into this kind of retrofit. What can we do in order to make our housing stock much more sustainable for the future? So educate, and then it's moving on through, once we've educated, how do we change policy? So it's a long process, but it starts with education. So watch out for Terrafirma's climate hub that's coming.
Great, Tim, thanks very much for that. We have a question from Nicolai van Swieten. What do you think the biggest blocker is to developing geospatial products addressing climate change issues? So actually, I don't know if you wanted to have a think about that one, start with that one.
I mean,
or I can come back, whatever.
Well, I was going to say, for us, one of the challenges that I think Grace has already touched on is that if you don't have standard, like I mentioned in the presentation, you're comparing all these different things. If you can't get each of those languages to speak together, then it becomes a little bit difficult. And for us, we work with, so our company is built on building collaborations with a whole bunch of different types of data providers, sensor providers, satellite providers, all these different types of people. But even in their kind of stage of pre-processing to get the data to the side where customers can then use it, there's a whole bunch of hidden assumptions. They're all done to different standards, and so it's quite tricky to leverage the true value of being able to compare and get all these different viewpoints if you can't kind of standardize and compare that in a way. So it's one, getting access to it, and then doing that in a way that helps put it in a format where then you can get high order value through analysis and data science and all this kind of stuff, right?
Thanks very much, and to you, Daniel, and then to you, Arthur, on that same question. What do you see as the biggest blocker to developing geospatial products that address climate change issues?
As has already been kind of said, I guess all of our businesses in one way or another rely quite significantly on good quality data. The relationship that we've all got with Ordnance Survey is a really good example of that, which gives us quite a good foundation of information. But there is so much more that we need, or we should expect, I guess, as either in the marketplace or as citizens. And I think we just need to, I guess, all agree some sort of consensus of what those things are. For me, on the net zero and the climate change front, I think that there is not really enough data. To be honest, I mean, it's ridiculous, but actually in the planning system, we actually really struggle to track how many actual homes are being delivered. So councils who prepare local plans, you literally, depending on when they've done their annual survey or whatever, they won't actually know how many homes have actually been built in their area, which seems quite strange in this day and age. Obviously, that there are lots of different great data sources like Ordnance Survey that can help with those sorts of things. But actually, if we can't even work out how many homes are being built, how are we going to understand the carbon impact or the other potential impacts that are going to be coming from them? And I think that there is lots of work that needs to be done either by the Geospatial Commission or OS or government, wider central government to enable that to happen.
Thanks very much. I'll come back to you, Ed. Arthur, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with that. And then from the opposite perspective, specifically from a climate perspective, the key way to create a market is to come up with, and I think it touches on what Tim was touching, or I think it was Tim touching on in terms of, oh no, sorry, CarbonDiem was Zach at CarbonDiem was touching on in terms of why fossil fuels are being subsidized, but the environment needs to be, or carbon needs to be costed in some way for us to be able to account for it and be able to work through it in that way. Because if we're all trying to create solutions for it in the market at the moment, kind of is interested in it, but usually from a CSR / internal accounting point of view, but there aren't any strong economic drivers yet beyond maybe existential risk that are driving it.
Big changes ahead of us then, potentially. Thanks, Arthur. Ed, over to you.
From the perspective of sort of natural solutions out in the countryside and the farm landscape, one of the issues we have with data is that there is a wealth of absolutely vital ecological data, and it's sitting in a variety of different environmental record centres and people such as that. And unfortunately, their business models is that they survive by flogging the data. So it means it's behind a paywall, it's not open. So there needs to be a way of getting this vital data out and usable by everybody. And that probably goes back to funding the people that collate and manage and collect that data properly in a better manner. But without that, you get the situation where national initiatives miss a load of important data and actually are very quickly discredited when you get out in the field and look at a map and realize that they've missed, you know, a local wildlife site which could be incredibly important, and it's just not there. It doesn't work. So you've got to find ways of getting at the relevant data, which can be quite granular. And there are sort of business model issues that stop that happening that need to be addressed.
Right. Thanks very much, Ed. And I guess the whole of addressing net zero is about exploring new business models, collaborative business models, perhaps, in order to address those issues. Is there anybody amongst the startups who wanted to make a comment that they have not yet had the opportunity to do so? No, that's great. The other place people can visit is the Geovation exhibitor page. So if you're on the website for the virtual pavilion, go and have a look at Geovation's exhibitor page as well. And people can connect to you there. Also, you can leave inquiries in the contact us box and access links that you've listed as well. Okay, and that's just advice to all of us as we close off. My observation and why I find this area so exciting, space and geospatial, is it's such a powerful ingredient in trying to address perhaps old problems, looming problems, huge challenges in new ways. And what strikes me as the ingredients for that is yes, the data, but it's the collaboration and the startup energy and the bringing together of different skill sets that you're all exhibiting. So I think the future's really bright, and I think it's a huge opportunity in addressing these enormous problems. But I think it's an exciting opportunity as well. So for me, geospatial is the ingredient, along with collaboration and the energy you're all showing. So I just want to say thanks very much to you all for putting the time in today to tell us what you're doing and where you're at. I think it's fascinating and humbling. Do visit geovation.uk and join Geovation. And also do take the opportunity, those who are listening in, to connect up with our startup speakers and Geovation and our panel speakers as well. So I'd like to thank everybody today for their input. If it was a football match, I think it's one that's well worth watching again. 2 very exciting halves, and we've gone into extra time as well. So you're going to be able to view this again online for at least 90 days. So thank you to you all. Thank you to our KTN hosts, and thanks to the team at Ordnance Survey and Geovation for putting this on as well. And have a good rest of the day. Thanks very much. Bye now.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thanks
Chris.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye-bye now.